Welcome to New York Buddha Dharma. So tonight we are starting to make our way through the book Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism by Chögyam Trungpa. This book was first published in 1972. Trungpa Rinpoche had arrived in this country in 1970 from England. He had left Tibet in 1959 ahead of the communists, and that adventure is detailed in a couple of different books that he has produced about that time. He traveled across the Himalayas. Many of his party died. And he arrived in India and became a teacher in northern India in the Young Lamas School in Dalhousie, which was run by a theosophist named Frida Bedi. Theosophist being sort of a Western, Eastern mystical movement. And he taught there for a while. Oops, I should do this. And then he received a Spalding Fellowship, it was called, with some money, to go to England and study at Oxford, which he did with another Lama named Akong Tulku, Akong Rinpoche. And while they were there, the two of them started a meditation center in Scotland, which was named after the great Buddhist monastery in Lhasa called Samye Ling. All of this is in his autobiography, Born in Tibet. At one point, a couple of sort of major landmarks while he was still in England, he was invited by the Queen of Bhutan to come and do a retreat in Bhutan at the famous caves called Tagtsang. Tagtsang means tiger's nest. In the 8th century, the great Indian Siddha saint Padmasambhava had stopped and meditated there with his consort, Princess Mandarava, who was pregnant at the time, and he was on his way to Tibet. He had been invited by the king of Tibet, King Trisong Detsen, and because the king wanted to see Buddhism established in Tibet, he had invited a Mahayana teacher, not a tantric teacher, named Kamalashila. And Kamalashila had come to Tibet and was having a great deal of difficulty. He was being opposed by the local demons and spirits. And so he had converted a number of people to Buddhism, and by day they would try to build the monastery, the Samye Ling monastery, and by night the local deities and demons would tear it down. And finally King Trisong Detsen told Kamalashila, Kamalashila told King Trisong Detsen, you need somebody with more mojo than I have. And he suggested this fellow Padmasambhava, who was a tantric. So Padmasambhava stopped there and meditated before he went to Tibet. This place is remarkable, Tagtsang. It's on the side of a 2,000-foot cliff, caves. Trungpa Rinpoche used to say that the toilet there was known as the long drop. And just going up to those caves is quite, evidently I haven't done it, but quite a task. You can go up on donkeys, but most people don't, because the drop off the trail is so sheer and scary that they would rather walk. And so in 1967, I think, Trungpa Rinpoche went to Tagtsang at the invitation of the Queen of Bhutan and did a retreat there with his first Western student, a man named Richard Arthur, who just died this year. We had a Sukhavati for him here. And his Tibetan name was Kongadawa. And while he was there, he received a terma. A terma is a treasure, a hidden treasure, that was planted by Padmasambhava, and it came through the air. It was a mind terma. And he wrote it down across the centuries. Came from 800 years ago. And it's called the Sadhana of Mahamudra. and Richard Kunga helped him translate that. And we still chant that today. It's quite beautiful. And then he went back to England after his retreat was over, and things changed for him there. He had a very bad accident, an automobile accident, which put him in the hospital and left him partially paralyzed for the rest of his life on his left side. His left leg, his left arm, which he always had to kind of move around like this, and it also affected his vocal cords and made his voice higher, which we all became accustomed to. And after a while, he decided he married an Englishwoman named Diana Pybus, and the two of them decided to come to this country at the invitation of some of his American students who were in England. They and two of them in particular owned a farm, well, not a farm, but a kind of a piece of land with an old woodcutter's house on it up in northern Vermont. And they offered it to Trungpa Rinpoche to start a meditation center, which he accepted. He and his students threw the I Ching before they left, and they got the hexagram having to do with don't tread on the tiger's tail. And so they named this meditation center to be Tail of the Tiger. And Trungpa Rinpoche came to the West in early 1970. In January or February, actually, a friend of mine said that he was going to hear this Tibetan Lama speak, and I said I'd come with him. We went, and it turned out it wasn't Trungpa Rinpoche. He wasn't able to get a visa, and instead Kunga, Richard Arthur, walked in and gave a talk. And then a few months later, Rinpoche did get a visa, came, and he gave a talk in New York to which I went, and I wasn't at all interested. I thought this was boring. He gave a talk on a sense of humor, which wasn't funny. And not only that, but he walked in, he was wearing a suit and tie. That's not my idea of a guru, or it wasn't then. And he was accompanied by this blonde wearing a mini skirt, and that was his wife. And I was sitting on the floor trying to maintain full lotus posture. I was very flexible in those days, relatively. And trying not to look up her skirt at her underwear, which was plainly visible to me. So I thought that was the end of that. And I and another fellow bought tickets to go to India. We thought we'd go see if we could find a teacher the way Ram Dass, Richard Alpert, he and Lyrian Alpert were the LSD gurus, and he had gone to India and found his guru. We thought we'd go try and do that too. And failing success, we'd still smoke a lot of dope and have a great adventure. And so I'd bought a charter flight ticket to leave in August. And my compatriot, who was going to go with me, went up to Tail of the Tiger. And he called me from up there. I was waiting in New York, and it was very hot, July. And he said, why don't you come up here? It's beautiful, it's cooler. You can listen to this fellow give Dharma talks about Buddhism, about which I knew nothing. I knew almost nothing about Buddhism. And so I went up, and Rinpoche was giving interviews. And I listened to a few talks and signed up for an interview. And that changed my life. He was giving what in the tradition was called pointing out instruction. In the Japanese tradition, it's called satori. He helps the student see the nature of their own mind. I had no idea this was coming. I sat down just to have a conversation. But he was doing it with everyone. And my life just turned on a dime at that point. I didn't really realize it for a while. I kept asking him, well, do you think it's time for me to leave and go to India now? And he kept saying, I think you should hang on a little longer. You might be some more for you to learn. Eventually, I realized I wasn't going to India anymore. There was nothing to find there that I hadn't already found with him. So I went to Colorado with him, and my life went on from there. Now, these days and more are all written about. When Rinpoche went to Colorado, we were all hippies back in those days, more or less. Some a lot more. and some a bit less. I mean, I was a graduate of an Ivy League college, and wearing a ponytail and a beard, but some of these guys were like 16 and barefoot and doing more dope and LSD than I had ever dreamed of doing. It just mind-blowingly huge amounts. And traveling around with no money. And they were and starting communes. And Rinpoche had been invited to Boulder by 4 teachers at the University of Colorado to come and teach there, which he did. He taught one course. I helped him. I assisted him in that. But basically what happened was that people were coming from the coasts, east and west, to hear him. And a community developed in Boulder. There were communes all over the place. It was the age of the communes. And Colorado was commune capital of the United States. And each commune had its own distinct flavor, very different one to the next. There was the Brainerd Lake commune up on the Peak-to-Peak Highway. It was very aggressive, Marxist. There was the Red Rockers down in southern Colorado. They were L.A. Studio musicians who had a lot of money and would come out there to sort of chill out and be together. There were just many kinds, but there was one in particular out on the east of town. It was called the Pygmy Farm. So called because a lot of the members of this particular commune were short. And a lot of them had come up from New Orleans, where they had met a voodoo woman who had given them strange names, like Ragatara, Emer, Mao, Nerti, Zalia, Zonto, and more. These people, and they showed up and became Trungpa Rinpoche's students, and he loved them. They were open. He was giving them the same kind of pointing out he gave to me, and they were so receptive and so generous. I mean, they didn't have any money. They made their money making leather clothes, and taking deer antler and putting it on the ends of knives for deer antlers and making pot pipes out of deer antler and these long clothes. I remember one particular guy who I won't even name him. He's still around today, but he was very tall, beautiful build, long, scraggly blonde beard, long blonde ponytail, and wearing this fringed leather cloak with a fringe hanging down like this, and a huge, like, Bowie knife with a deer antler handle in the back pocket. And he looked like the king of hippiedom, that guy. And a lot of them were like that, beards, long beards. And they were so generous. They didn't have any money, and we didn't have a car. 2 people who had invited Rinpoche lent us a VW Bug, and they needed it back. So the Pygmies just gave us their car. It was a bright yellow Carmen Ghia, beat up Carmen Ghia, little sports car, with a VW engine. They gave it to us, and they all became his students. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is that if you want to read about the milieu in which this book was written, Cutting Through, one of the Pygmies, a guy named Jim Lowry, who at the time was going under the name Jim Moynihan because he was a draft evader and the FBI was out looking for him. He eventually settled up with the FBI and retook his real name, Jim Lowry. And he has written a terrific book about those years. There's a chant which we'll do at the end, I think, to Trungpa Rinpoche. It was written by a great teacher. And in it there's the line, you who have realized the Dharma of what is, with oceans of skillful deeds of a Buddha's son, you possess the Buddha activity which tames untamable beings. That's us. And Jim titled his book, Taming Untamable Beings. And it's all about Trungpa Rinpoche, those years, and the Pygmies. And it's a terrific read, and it will give you a taste. And not only that, but you see, when a teacher gives a student pointing out, in the Tibetan tradition, as it's called, or they call it showing the student the nature of his or her own mind, the teacher will usually enjoin the student to keep it secret. because in the telling, you can dissipate the impact. What usually happens is that people tell about it, but many years later. And that's precisely what's in this book. In this book, there's a chapter called Transmission. And what Jim did was he interviewed some of the pygmies today about their experience with Trungpa Rinpoche then. And if you want to read first-hand accounts of what can happen between a teacher and a student when a teacher has the power that Trungpa Rinpoche had, which was extraordinary. He was extraordinary. My second wife was one of his secretaries. She used to call him Mr. Magic. It came out of his pores. It was just... So you can read that book. It's a terrific read. I've been teaching this book, Cutting Through, up in Westchester. And up there, a lot of the people in that course, about 30 people up there doing it, and a lot of them have read and loved Taming Untamable Beings. Jim did a good job. And it starts out with that classic line, if you can remember the 60s, you weren't there. Oh, I could tell you stories about the pygmies. They were just something. What an amazing group of people. Wonderful group of people. I had a great affection for them too. So this book came out of that period. Rinpoche was teaching all of us. And we took talks that he gave and we edited them and compiled them into this book, Cutting Through. This book, since its publication in 1972, has, as near as anybody can tell, sold upwards of 500,000 copies around the world. And Chögyam Rinpoche, who's a teacher who's coming, he's going to be speaking up in Westchester. We tried to get him here, but it just didn't work with the days. He's a wonderful teacher from Tibetan, obviously. And I'm going to read you what he said about it, Cutting Through. I'm not quite sure I understand why he says this, but here it is. I mean, I can understand it, but it's pretty intense. He says, this is one of his, a student of his who listened to him give a talk, is posted this in an email. While holding up the book during the fourth and final class of a seminar he was giving, Rinpoche said, this is of Cutting Through, this book contains the full practice of accumulating virtue and wisdom for overcoming one's own ego clinging. It doesn't matter whether we practice Tantra or Sutra. Those are the two main divisions of Tibetan Buddhism. Both Tantra and Sutra agree on the same point of overcoming ego clinging. Since teachings manifest in a timely manner, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism is the teaching for this century. So please practice it. Reading it is not enough. You need to practice it. That's Chögyam Rinpoche. So tonight, I encourage you to read the book as we move along through this for the next 15 weeks or so. I think we're going to spend on it. I'm going to perhaps give you other things to read as well, now and then, that I think are appropriate and would flesh this out. But tonight we're going to start with the introduction and the first chapter, which is on spiritual materialism. Now what spiritual materialism is the co-option. You see, materialism means using something for one's own personal ego aggrandizement, selfish, bolstering the sense of self. In Buddhism, the primary goal of Buddhism is to overcome the belief in one's self, the idea that I am, I exist. And this is seen as the primary mistake that confused sentient beings make, is to believe in a self. And when one believes that I exist, we also believe that other exists as well. So we're in this constant polar relationship between I and other. And that polar relationship between I and my money, I and my friends, I and my enemies, I and my lovers, I and my parents, I and my whatever, I and my bicycle, I and my possessions, is fraught. It's fraught with struggle. The struggle to make things better, to avoid things becoming what they were, worse. We are constantly manipulating our lives in a sort of a jockeying thing to try and achieve some kind of ideal relationship between I and other, which is a total boondoggle. It's a mistake. It doesn't have to be done. It needn't be made, that journey. So, materialism is the way in which we do this. True spirituality, the Buddhist version, is cutting through our confusion to uncover the awakened state of mind. Now, the awakened state of mind is already here. It's our nature. It's what we truly are. It's just that we've gotten confused. We've gotten sidetracked in these false beliefs of these problems of I and other. And they have obscured it like the way clouds obscure the sky. Occasionally the clouds part and we get a glimpse of the sky. But a lot of the time we're just living in foggy days, gray days. You can't see the sky at all. The sky, you see, is the enlightened mind in this metaphor. And the clouds which come across it are our beliefs in self and other and all of the complicated relationships that form between those two poles. So, really what true spirituality is the use of study and especially meditation to cut through that belief, to cut through the struggle of ego. Ego is, at its core, struggle. That's what ego is. That's the way ego keeps itself alive. I've got a problem. I've got to solve it. Whatever the problem is. My money, my sex life, my loneliness, my age, my health. All these things. My studies, my job, my boss. I've got these problems. And we're struggling, continually struggling. It's an endless wheel. You can die struggling like that. And most people do. But what meditation is cutting through that struggle and just coming into clear, open awareness. And we start by doing it just a little bit. And we start by doing it, and when you start to do it, one of the first things that happens is you begin to realize how much you're thinking. Most people walk down the street, they have no clue how much they're thinking. They're just thinking, including us. Thinking about all kinds of things, and then suddenly a horn goes off and you realize, oh, I was lost in thought, I just walked by the store I was looking for. So true spirituality is cutting through confusion to uncover the awakened state of mind which is already there in us. It's not a matter of building something up, but of burning away confusion. And the way you do that primarily is by meditation practice. Meditation practice, people often think meditation practice is resting in awareness. It's not. Meditation practice is returning to awareness again and again and again. You are sitting there, you start out, you're aware, thoughts come up, they take you away, suddenly you're in Oshkosh having a fight with your mother, suddenly you're in Tallahassee making love to your lover, and then suddenly you realize, I've been dreaming. And at that point, you're back. That coming back, that's what meditation is. If you think that meditation is resting in awareness, then the problem is that you're constantly beating yourself up for failing. You're saying, I'm a lousy meditator. I get lost in thoughts all the time. That is another really big thought. And it's another very egotistical thought. Me and my meditation. What you do in meditation is you see that you're thinking, and already you're back. It's just like in the morning when you wake up from a dream. As soon as you realize that you were dreaming, well, you're awake. You're not dreaming anymore. That's how you know you were dreaming. Same thing in meditation practice. As soon as you realize you're dreaming, you're back. And you rest. And then the next thought takes you away again whenever it does. And then you realize that thought and you come back again. It's the constant act of coming back. And by doing that and by seeing those thoughts, you begin to develop the habit of coming back and of resting in awareness. It just happens. You burn away these thoughts. You begin to realize they're just fantasies. They're just arbitrary fantasies. Not only we think they're so important. Oh, I got to worry about my job, My job's at stake. in another year or two, you won't even remember that. You won't even be cross your mind. It's like we move through these dramas and leave them far behind. Most. So he says, we coddle and nurture this ego, this I, and struggle not to see that it is a fiction. It's a lie. All I is the hero or the heroine of a story that we tell ourselves. I've got this problem. I did something great. And we tell ourselves these stories which are fraught with struggle, with hope and fear, with good and bad. And then in the moments when we come completely present and we stop telling the story, there is no I. It's gone. Because it's just a story. Just like Mickey Mouse is a story. So ego tries to shield us from all this, tries to keep the lie alive. And there are three main mechanisms, and this is what he's describing here, that are called the three lords of materialism. Actually, in Tibetan, they're called the three barbarians. The Tibetan word for it might amuse you is lalo. And I say it might amuse you because the word barbarian, which it translates lalo, comes from the Greek. And the reason that the Greeks had this word barbarian is that they thought that anyone who didn't speak Greek was basically talking gibberish and was saying bar, 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 bar. That's the etymology of barbarian. A lot of cultures have a similar word for barbarian and a similar etymology. In Chinese, the word for barbarian is That says it all, doesn't it? A barbarian is a non-Han Chinese person. In Tibetan, it's lalo, because the Tibetans felt that anybody who wasn't speaking Tibetan was saying lalo, 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 lalo. And these are the three barbarians, the three lalos. Trungpa Rinpoche chose to translate them as the three lords of materialism. And they are the lord of form, the lord of speech, and the lord of mind, which about covers the waterfront. There isn't anything else. Form, your body, physicality, speech, which means meaning, and mind, which has to do with mind. So the lord of form is the way we manipulate the material world to shield us from the irritations of the raw and unpredictable, irritating aspects of life, because they're a threat to ego's well-being. So the most common form of the lord of form, this lord of materialism, is the pursuit of money and material goods. But you can flip it. And so, for instance, back in the 60s, I remember the ethic, don't own more than you can fit in your VW Bug, right? It's this idea of simplicity. Or go off into the woods like Thoreau and just live the very, very, very simple life. And in doing that, you achieve a kind of happiness. There's the lord of form again, manipulation of the physical world in order to achieve happiness for ego, for the I, me, my selfishness. But the most common form is Donald Trump. Outrageous and flashy wealth. The lord of speech is the use of intellect to manage the phenomenal world. Its most fully developed manifestations are ideologies of all sorts: religious, political, philosophical. Would there have been utopian ideologies where people set off to form utopian societies based on an ideology? Religious societies, you want to be holy, on the side of God, and so you dress and act in conformance with religious ideals. And these, again, are concepts. I think the most monolithic and powerful form of the Lord of Speech that has ever walked the earth, if you can walk the earth, is Chinese communism. I was a student of Chinese communism before I became a Buddhist. I studied it at Yale, and then again at the University of Chicago in graduate school, and where my focus was on the Cultural Revolution as it was happening then in China. And today, it's even more powerful, although there's a lot of blowback happening as well in China, because it's very, very repressive and restrictive. But I don't think there's ever been an attempt on this planet to order the lives of so many people so strictly according to a set of ideas as in communist China, where the sayings of Chairman Mao, everybody walks around carrying them in their pockets, studying them. They're loud, they're blasted from loud speakers with facial recognition software now. They're tracking everybody as they walk down the street. That's beginning to happen a lot in China. That's scary, huh? Talk about brave new world. I think it's really powerful. But conformance to anything, including Buddhism, as an ideology, and letting it run your life, or trying to, is again the Lord of speech. It's the attempt to use an ideology, a set of concepts, to achieve some kind of happiness for I, for me, for all of us as I's and me's. And even a country like communist China can be a gigantic ego itself, which I think very much China is at this point. And he says, intellect itself is not the Lord of speech. Intellect is a good thing, being smart, intelligent, using your mind. It's the use of it in concept to filter us, to filter and screen us from the direct perception of what is. You see, when you use an ideology like Chinese communism to interpret the world, you're seeing everything through the lens of that ideology. Everything is colored by it. We can do that with Buddhism, we can do it with Catholicism, we can do it with republicanism or democratic ideals, liberalism, whatever, all kinds of things. And we see the world through the lens of these concepts instead of seeing it as it truly is. The Lord of Mind is the most pernicious, and it's the one that he's really talking about here. It's the use of spiritual and psychological disciplines to maintain our consciousness of self. And he regarded Western psychology as a potential, when it's practiced wrongly, badly, way to solidify belief in self as well. And certainly spirituality can be used that way. Especially, he felt theistic versions of spirituality, belief in I and God, where you are trying to achieve some kind of holiness. But it also happens in Buddhism, and it happens in this way. If you use meditation as a sedative, as a way of achieving a kind of super calm, you see there are two kinds of basic meditation. The first kind is we call shamatha, which means abiding in peace, and that leads to the second kind, which is vipassana. It's not possible to use vipassana as part of the Lord of Mind, but it is possible to use shamatha that way. Shamatha is one-pointed concentration on an object, like a mantra, like the breath, like a statue in front of you. Doesn't matter. It could be a stick. And believe it or not, there are practices where you just use a stick. And you practice, you focus your mind one-pointedly on that object. And when thought comes up, you come back to your awareness of that object. And if you practice it monolithically, which is very hard to do, it takes a lot of work, then you can achieve what are called the dhyanas. The dhyanas are very advanced, high states of concentration. And they're basically trance states because you've achieved a form of self-hypnosis. And people do this. Yogis have done this. And they are focused so one-pointedly and so fixedly on the object of their meditation that the world falls away. It's very blissful, it's very happy, and it is a cul-de-sac, it's a dead end. Because like all created things, it's going to end. Just like if you build up your muscles and you stop exercising at some point, they go away. Or if you build up your muscles and you age, they go away. Sooner or later, it just goes, because that's what happens to all created things. All created things are impermanent. And if you build them up, eventually they will degrade. And that's what happens with the dhyanas, and so they're very dangerous because you can get stuck in them. And there are lots of stories about yogis wandering around, great teachers, including this guy. That's Dingo Chense Rinpoche, about him wandering around in Tibet and finding yogis in caves who've gotten stuck in the dhyanas. There are 8 dhyanas. getting in greater and greater power and subtlety, taking longer and longer to achieve. And when a yogi gets stuck in the dhyanas, their body can just wither away. This is what the lore has it. Because they're just completely mental. Yeah? And the body can wither away until, as they put it in the scriptures, there's nothing left but a palpitating heart. That's extreme. So the job of the teacher who goes around and finds a yogi who's gotten stuck in the dhyanas is to wake him up and say, you're stuck in a cul-de-sac. Get out of it. Get moving. Tread the path. Go back. Live in society. Start doing good for other people. Let go of this blissful trance state. And that's the Lord of Mind, but also psychological disciplines can be used that way. If you're using it psychology, like psychotherapy or psychoanalysis, in order to become happy rather than true, sane, then it becomes the Lord of Mind as well. And there are versions of psychotherapy that definitely were heading in that direction, especially some of the more extreme forms that were around when Trungpa Rinpoche was teaching, like Primal Scream, remember? And other things. I remember John Lennon singing that song. He was doing Primal Scream therapy, and he sang that song, Mama, stay home, Daddy, don't go. He was doing Primal Scream in a song. So most of us, if we examine our actions, he says, would probably agree that we are ruled by one or more of the three lords. Pursuit of physical stuff, pursuit of ideological correctness, that's going to make our lives good and right, or pursuit of a happy state of mind. And he says the three lords rule and seduce us by propagating the fundamental myth. And this is the hard one. This is really the thing to contemplate as you tread the path, and it becomes more and more real. And that myth is that we are solid beings. It's false, a huge hoax, a fraud, and the root of suffering. And you begin to get a sense of that it is a hoax, when you begin to practice meditation and you notice that every time you come completely present here, there's no story about I going on. It just evaporates like mist in the sun. And then it kicks up again. I, how am I doing? Did I understand that? What am I going to do for lunch? And then you notice, I'm thinking. And you're back for a second. And there's no I. So the process of meditation creates gaps in the story of I, gaps in the struggle. And that's why even in shamatha, that beginning meditation, one of the hallmarks of shamatha is that we begin to feel more peaceful. I have a friend who's going through a great deal of difficulty. She has her stepfather just died, her mother's 92, and living alone. She's taking care of her mother. Her mother has illnesses. She has a son who's mentally disturbed and living in an institution. She's taking care of him, and she has other problems as well. And she finds that when she meditates, it gives her calm. It gives her peace. She can come out of the worry and the pain of these situations. But it's true for all of us. That's why it's called the translation of shamatha, that kind of meditation. One pointed up, focus on an object. The translation is abiding in peace. So he says, so the process of meditation, above all, is the act of letting be. You're letting be your own mind. You're letting be the whole world, just in flashes. That doesn't mean you stop responding. You can be incredibly responsive to the world in that space of letting be without I and ego. In fact, you can be more responsive, more accurately responsive, more open-heartedly responsive, because there's no ego in there. There's no ego in there saying, what am I getting out of it? And you can see what is needed in a given situation and respond generously, compassionately in that moment. He says, the more we generate thoughts, the busier we are mentally, and the more convinced we are of our existence. That's the nature of thoughts. He says thoughts, in this is more advanced meditation, they are just allowed to occur spontaneously and become an expression of our sanity. They become the expression of the precision and clarity of the awakened state of mind. Kensei Rinpoche, that gentleman on the shrine that I pointed to before, says the proper way to see thought in meditation is as if you were riding on a train and you're looking out the window and you're watching the scenery go by. You don't influence the scenery, and the scenery has very little effect on you, if any. Same thing with thoughts. You just watch them go by. He said, so the Buddha discovered that there is no need to struggle to prove one's existence, to struggle to be free, no need to struggle to free oneself from the three lords. The process of its struggle, the absence of struggle, is in itself freedom. That's wild. If you give up struggle, there's tremendous freedom to be responsive and accurate and powerful in this world. And this is the attainment of Buddhahood. Just a few more things from the second chapter. This was actually all in the introduction. I think the introduction is quite extraordinary. The second chapter was more about spiritual materialism, but it actually had less in it, the chapter on spiritual materialism. He says, the simplicity of meditation means just experiencing the ape instinct of ego. See, ego, with its thoughts, he calls it ape instinct. It's constantly pulling stuff towards me, pushing it away, like this, like an ape. Really just powerfully and unintelligently and meanly, selfishly. So the simplicity of meditation means experiencing that. You don't try and push that away, or you're being an ape again. You just see it, and then it evaporates. You see it, and in the moment of seeing it, it's just like waking up in the morning again. As soon as you realize that you were having that dream of the ape instinct of ego, you're not. You're awake. You're back. And finally he says, it is a lonely, individual path. And I can't emphasize that enough. Sooner or later, it's going to come to each one of us how lonely this path truly is. We are born alone, and we will die alone. And in the course of our lives, it's really interesting. I keep thinking, I'm 74 now, and I'm experiencing loneliness like I never have before in my life. There are times when I get together with people and the loneliness is assuaged, but it's more powerful than it's ever been. And I'm really appreciating and wondering the genius of the Beatles when they wrote that song, Eleanor Rigby. And they sang about all the lonely people, where do they all come from? I date women on Match.com, and I've used a couple of other of the online dating services. The loneliness out there is so powerful. There are so many lonely single people, especially as you get older. Because as you get older, everything falls away. Your health, but especially sooner or later, if you're in a couple, one of you is going to die and is going to leave the other person alone. And loneliness comes. And that song was amazing. How did those guys in their 20s see that and actually write about it, And this is a very lonely individual path. It's a matter of making peace with one's loneliness. You see, what makes loneliness or aloneness unpleasant is the constant sorrow of not having company. Company's out there, and company, if you have company, you say, that person's there, so I'm here. That person's there, so I'm here. And they like me, so I'm not only here, but I'm good, and I'm well. But if there's no one out there to tell you that, then you don't have the reinforcement. You don't have that confirmation that you're here, that you're okay, that you're a good person, that you're lovable. Instead, you're alone. And all your attempts to find that kind of confirmation go out into nowhere. And that is when you have to begin to stop the I-other game and really begin to appreciate what it means to practice meditation and awareness, of coming back into the present without ego, without I, complaining, wanting things to be different. And the funny thing is that what he's going to talk about later is that what begins to come as the solace for loneliness, you might say, or as the replacement, is to see that this world, when we give up I and other, is so vivid. I and other is like a set of sunglasses. We're thinking. I'm worrying about this. I don't like that person. Where's my money going to come from? I need dinner. And we're thinking. We don't even see the world because we're so lost in thought. We're seeing it through a veil darkly, as it says in the Bible. And when you begin to practice meditation, that aloneness, and that veil begins to drop, the world becomes much more vivid, alive, warm, because it's not part of our game of self-aggrandizement, of good and bad. And it can become much more meaningful. And that's where the solace starts to come in from loneliness, but it's a hard journey for many people. That loneliness and aloneness. I look through these match profiles and I see divorced, widowed, divorced, widowed, I had 30 years of a wonderful marriage. I had 50 years of a wonderful marriage. My husband died. My wife died. And now they're alone. And it's heartbreaking. So I think that's the beginning of this book.
Why go on?
Yeah, really. Oh, man. There's so much more. This book is extraordinary, as Changling Rinpoche says. It's Ken Friedman, was it, who did the Backwards Path of Adi? Was it Ken Friedman?
Yeah.
Yeah. You see, the teachings are graded from beginning to advanced. And the advanced teachings, the most advanced teachings, are called Great Perfection, Chögyam. And in Sanskrit that's called Ati Yoga, or sometimes Mahasandhi. All of us who studied with Trungpa Rinpoche, including in that book too, know that he was teaching Chögyam even when he was teaching the beginning. He never taught down to us, taught us like beginners. He taught everybody as though they could wake up at any moment. And he gave us the most advanced teachings. This teaching in this chapter, this introduction, is very advanced. If you listen to a traditional Theravada teacher, they'll be teaching you about the Four Noble Truths, which comes later, the 3 marks of existence, suffering, impermanence, and egolessness. It's a whole different world than this. So, we can have a Q&A discussion. Anybody wants? I think we need to change the batteries. I thought they worked. It's Alex and Zach.
Yes.
Powerful. Let's stop discussion.
Scott, you must have something to say.
You can't.
Anyone have anything to say?
You were here for this, Scott.
What?
You were here for all this coming down.
Well, actually, the first book I read was this book, and this and the Myth of Freedom were just extraordinary. The one that came out right after this. That was when I was sort of entering the community.
Yeah.
I'm reading.
Yeah.
I remember reading this book, very clearly because I was just starting to take some classes. It was, the late '70s, and I had gone to see a lot of different teachers, Hindus, Hasidic, all kinds of ways to really get away from my pain, and I chanted Hare Krishna. I did all these things.
What was the last one?
I chanted Hare Krishna
Oh,
all night one time,
yes,
up in the hills above Berkeley. It was with a bunch of other crazy people. But what always struck me about Trungpa Rinpoche's presentation, and it took me a few years to really accept the fact that he was saying that the path is not designed to take you away from yourself, but it's designed to make you face yourself and the reality of your life. And that was when I remember reading this the other day, when the last sentence that you were talking about, the individual quality of the path and the loneliness, because in those days with communes and everything else and political movements, we were looking for all kinds of ways to, be part of a group and not have to, really figure out what was going on with ourselves. But what struck me, and I'm sure we'll be covering this later, is as you said, the three jewels. The first jewel is the Buddha and his example, the Dharma and his teachings. But Rinpoche always emphasized that the third jewel, the Sangha, the community, was incredibly important. Even though we were walking the path, in a sense, alone, because everyone has to make their own way. And so that was a message that he was relentless in presenting, that this is a very lonely path, but you sort of had to unwind all the other utopian possibilities before you could actually face that fact. So, and here we are 40, 50 years later, so
Here we are.
still wondering what the heck he was talking about. And how, the personal aspect of it was so powerful with him. And the fact, as you pointed out, that I went to Ken Friedman's program, Backwoods Ati, and you spoke of him, of Rinpoche giving mind transmission very early.
Oh, yeah.
And teaching from that point of view. When you read his talks and teachings and listen to them, you realize he was always, we always used to say he's teaching from a Vajrayana point of view. What does that really mean? But he always had that view in mind, and I'm sure we'll get into that more.
We will.
Forgot what I was going to say. It was so clear tonight, the points that you made, and I'm just nodding my head through it. Yeah. And I loved what you said about, it's returning to awareness. And not just on the cushion, but it's a practice that you do off the cushion. It's that constant returning. And, the other thing that you mentioned, it's just that pristine awareness. There's nothing to get. There's nothing to find. It's here, right now, always, whenever you just look for it. And the other thing that the self, it is it's the key thing in Buddhism. When that self dissolves, even though it may come back and back and back, or it dissolves and sometimes it still feels like it's there, but it's just a feeling. It's just a feeling. And it just is like, oh, how stupid was I? What was I thinking? and why did I make it so complicated? And it just was this thought that there was a self. And not that there isn't a body, and not that there isn't doing, and not that there isn't seeing and eating and all the things that we do. There's just nobody outside of it that owns it or is looking at it. It's just the doing and the seeing. And there doesn't need to be anything else. And
hold up the mic.
It's just in a way so simple, but it just, who gets it?
Just what?
Sometimes I wonder why isn't this perceived this way? And it's not. And then I notice in myself, I can drift off, and all of a sudden I can fall back into my old patterns and habits, and I go, boy, that was just quick, It's just such a fascinating thing to watch, slide in and out, and not that there's an in and out, because it's always there. It's always it's just conscious awareness or unconscious awareness, conscious awareness or unconscious awareness, which is kind of like what you were saying, which I love that really simplified meditation. It's the returning to, and that's the practice. So this is wonderful stuff tonight. It always is, and I've missed being here for the last 6 weeks, but I had fun traveling. So it's delightful to be back, and I love the '60s stories. And you're right, if you remember them, you weren't there. And talk about VW buses and Beatles, So it's fun stuff.
Yeah,
Delightful for me. Thanks.
Thank you. So our work is very simple. It's to come back over and over again, and not to beat ourselves up at all about drifting off. And you begin to see it, the drifting off, and it's just not a big deal. And I think that what begins to happen is that the balance begins to shift. Your loyalty is shifting slowly. And when you start out, the loyalty is very much to all the Sturm und Drang, the storm and thunder of I, the drama, the hope, the fear, the unhappiness, the sadness, all of that. And then you begin to see glimmers of in awareness. But as the path goes on, your loyalty begins to shift more to this awareness of this clear, open space, the sky, that's behind the clouds always, that we can always come back to. And then the clouds, those thoughts of I and other, become more and more insignificant, have less and less power and importance. It's a slow, for me anyhow, I think there are some people for whom it just happens in an instant. They call those people instant realizers. But they're in the minority, although they're around. And then for the rest of us, it's a gradual shift. And Rinpoche called it shifting your loyalty from samsara to nirvana. And by nirvana, he just meant this open awareness of life in the present moment, which is the only real world we ever have, right? The rest of it's just dreams about the past, stories about the past. They're just stories. and stories about the future, it never happens the way we imagine it, not even close. You know? And then we come back to this. Rochelle.
Recently, someone posted a video that I'd never seen before, Rinpoche speaking. I think it was in the early 70s. I don't remember what he was talking about, but just the background of how he spoke and his personality is what I was really looking at. He was so cheerful and joyful in the present moment, and he took delight in everything. You know, he had a very upbeat, as you might, like an upbeat personality, because everything was joyful when he was teaching. He was so happy when he was just sitting in the kitchen eating breakfast or something. He was very happy. He was a very cheerful person. And that was very contagious, because when you were around him, you couldn't really be depressed, because he was so cheerful. And I think the bottom line of that cheerfulness was, probably his personality, but he just found life to be delightful, just in the present moment. It was a very unusual way that he was. That was, till this day, when I see him smiling and he's happy and he kids around and jokes, there's something else going on there except personality. It's like he really appreciates life so completely. In many ways, when you're teaching, John, it reminds me of him, because he was such a great teacher, and you're a great teacher, and you take delight in teaching, and Rinpoche loved to teach.
Rinpoche loved people.
He loved
One-on-one
people.
Groups. He just loved people. And he was the most non-self-referential human being I've ever met.
Completely.
He just didn't think about himself. He was always interested in you, the person sitting across from him, the people sitting across from him. He wanted to know what's going on in there,
Yeah, that was an extraordinary way of being. He really took delight in others, especially his students.
I'll tell you a quick story, okay? In those early days, there was a game that we all liked to play. There was sort of a parlor game. You sit around and you play games with each other. This game had no name. We just called it the game. I'm going to tell you about the game, and then you'll never be able to be it in the game, because now you'll know the secret. But you can do it with other people. Ideally, this game is performed with a bunch of people who know each other fairly well. So you know the ins and outs of the personality. One person is it, and they are sent out of the room. The rest of the people are instructed by the person who knows what the game is about what the game is. And here's what the game is. The person who's it is going to come back in, and they'll be told, you have to figure out what this game is. And you can do it by asking any of us questions, any question you like. We will always answer within the context of the game. And you have to see what is the pattern and what is this game. Now, the person is sent out of the room. They don't know what the game is. And you explain what the game is that when they come in and they ask you a question, you answer that question as though you were that person. Always. Every question. So to make it easy, if the person says to you, Zach, or Zach says to me, and I'm going to make an assumption about you, Zach, because I don't know you. But as Zach says to me, how many children do you have, John? I would say, see, I'm Zach's it, right? And I'm one of the people in the group. I would say, I don't have any children. You probably don't have any kids, right? You're too young. I say, I don't have any children. Well, he knows that I've got 2 kids. What's up with that? that I'm saying I don't have any children. Or he says to me, Alex says to me, what color shirt are you wearing? I'd say, I'm wearing a dark blue shirt. Is it blue? Yeah. I'm wearing a dark blue shirt. Well, look what I'm wearing. I'm wearing a black and white check. I'd say I'm wearing a dark blue shirt. So you always answer as though you were that person who's asking you the question, the people in the group. So the person comes in and you instruct them. You say, you can ask anybody any question you want. We will answer within the context of the game, and your job is to figure out what the game is. And the game, of course, is that we're being that person. And I say, and then we say, before this game starts, I'm going to give you some advice. Don't ask questions about the game. And a second piece of advice, keep your questions as mundane and concrete as possible. If they become abstract, it'll be harder for you. So I'll give you some examples of the wrong questions. Then the game starts. The person can ask any question they want. They might be getting frustrated, and they ask me. I'm one of the people. Ask one of us. They begin to feel like this is just confusing, and they say, "Marie, do you really understand the game? What this game is about?" And Marie, answering as though she were me, says, "Nope." See how confusing that gets? I watched a woman once. She was very neurotic and obviously self-attacking. And she was in the group, and she was it. And finally, she asked one of these people, "Do you like me?" And the person has said, "Not so much." Ooh, it was nasty. But I mean, see, if you ask a concrete question like, "What color shirt are you wearing?" then it becomes very simple, right? You ask me what color shirt I'm wearing, and I say, I'm wearing a blue T-shirt. That pretty much tells you the whole thing. Or pretty soon it does. And so we used to play this game a lot. And one day we played it with Rinpoche. And we were in one of the bedrooms up in 4 Mile House, up in the canyons outside of Boulder. And we had these... We had these Salvation Army mattresses that we got in those thin blue and white ticking mattresses, and somebody had given us tie-dye sheets, tie-dyed in Tibetan colors, yellow and orange. And he's sitting on one of these, and I think he might have been naked. He did that a lot. And there's a group of us sitting around, right? And we start the game, and he's asking questions. It went on for an hour and a half. An hour and 3/4. He just couldn't get it. He was perfectly cheerful. He kept asking us more questions, all kinds of things. Finally, he asked someone, "What's your style of interior decoration?" And the person said, "Well, I like the simplicity of Zen, but with splashes of Tibetan color." I could see something go click in his eyes, because that was him, you see. Most Tibetans, all they want to do is fill everything chock-a-block, wall to wall, with tchotchkes. You can't even see the white walls because it's so full of stuff. But he liked to see the big walls and then just have a thing splash of color. Now at the time too, he drank endlessly, and he was drinking a strange drink. He was drinking Mai Tais. That was his drink of choice at that particular time. And he turns to someone else and he says, "What drink do you like to drink?" And the person said, "Well, Mai Tais." And it went off. An hour and a half it took him. And when it went off, he exploded. He was roaring. He was holding his sides. Those things where you have those laughter that is going to feel like it's going to break your ribs? And he was rolling and with tears coming down his face. And it's my theory that the reason that he took him so long is because he wasn't referring back to himself when they gave those answers. It never occurred to him to think, hey, I like blah, blah, blah too, He didn't think that. Whereas with me, somebody says, I like this, and I'm thinking, oh, I like it, but with a little difference, I go self-referential right away. And he just didn't.
But I think it was called the qualities game.
Huh?
It was called the qualities game.
He used to play the qualities game a lot, yeah. Huh? That was a different game.
Yeah.
Qualities game was a different game. Yeah, totally. No, it wasn't. Totally different game. Qualities game. I forget how that went exactly, but it was a very different game. Honestly. This game, it had no name. It was just called the game because we were being the person who came in. So now you can go play this with somebody, right? You can't be it though, because you know the game. But you can, somebody you know. It's better with somebody you know and who knows you a bit, because you want to, if they say to you, what's your favorite dinner time drink, and you say, you know them, and you say lemonade, because that's their favorite lemonade drink. But you got to know that.
Oh, and they'll say, "Oh, that's my favorite too."
Yeah, they might for a while. So we should end on that note. Now we've given this transmission to anybody who watches this video. They can play the game. So we'll do the closing chants. I think we've got, what's the last chant on that page? Huh? Dedication of merit. And what's the one before that? Yeah, let's do the supplication to the Vidyadhara Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche. Okay? And the dedication. Okay. You who have realized the Dharma of what is, with oceans of skillful deeds of a Buddha's child, you possess the Buddha activity which tames untamable beings. May your body, speech, and mind be established in the Vajra nature through the strength of the Buddha's wisdom and compassion, and that of his children far and wide, by the power of the oceans of Lokapala's and Dharmapala's activity. I ask for the good of the teachings and of beings. May the body, speech, and mind of the glorious Guru be Vajra nature indestructibly. With the dawn of the blessings of the Gurus of the three lineages, you bring the sun of Dharma through the whole expanse of the world. The sight of you ripens and frees, and whatever encounters you is liberated. May the lotus garden of your good virtues beautify the world. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. Then we go to the third stanza. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.